We just sang a couple of old favorites of ours that have to do with ups and downs, good times and bad times. And that is very much the story of Joseph. The Wednesday class, that is an overview of the Hebrew Scriptures and all those wonderful stories from Jesus to Genesis. This week, one of the stories we studied was the story of Joseph. There were 3 patriarchs. In the class, we sing the patriarch song, but I'm not going to inflict that on you just now. You have to come to the class to learn that song. But Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who is also called Israel, but Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the 3 patriarchs. And Jacob married Rachel. And that is the story where he had to work for 14 years to earn her as his bride. And he and Rachel had 2 children, Joseph and Benjamin. He also had 3 other wives, Leah, Rachel's sister, and 2 other wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. Now, between these 4 wives, we have the 12 tribes as their descendants. Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, were 2 tribes. Benjamin became a tribe. And then all the other sons of the other 3 wives became the rest of the 12 tribes. Now, the tribe of Levi, I left and didn't highlight it because the tribe of Levi did not have a territory. All the other tribes had a territory where, that was where they lived. But the Levites served as the priests and the keepers of the temple and the chorus that sang the songs at the temple. And each of the 12 tribes has an astrological sign. The Jewish people at one point were really into astrology, so each of the 12 tribes has an astrological sign and a color assigned to it. Just like the 12 powers of colors, they have gemstones, each one assigned to a different tribe. So Jacob's wife of 14, that he worked for his 14-year wife that he had to work for, was one of 4 wives. And the way the culture was at that time was however many wives a man had, each wife had to have her own tent. And she raised her children that she had with the husband in her tent. So they were like 4 separate families in a way. But because Jacob loved Rachel and the other wives he just acquired, his favorite children were Joseph and Benjamin. So Joseph was not the oldest child, but Jacob was grooming him to be the chief of the clan. And so he spoiled him. He kept Joseph at home and taught him how to be an administrator. Joseph learned how to read and write and how to do some simple math so that he could learn how to run a large clan of people. And Jacob gave Joseph the famous coat of many colors, which is why I'm wearing my coat of many colors, and my watch band of many colors, and my bracelet of many colors. So just so you notice that. But because the other brothers were jealous, they were off doing manual labor, some big chore. Jacob sent them off for some big project, but he kept Joseph with him, of course. And then he decided to send some food to the boys. So Joseph was sent with, I don't know, lunch for his brothers, his half-brothers. And they saw him coming, and just something snapped. You know, here we're out here doing all this hard work, and he gets to sit in the tent and let Jacob just lavish affection on him. And they decided that they were going to get rid of him. So they threw him into a pit. And then they weren't sure what they were going to do while he was in the pit. Actually, Reuben, who was the oldest son, actually the oldest of all of them, he intended to go in the night and pull Joseph out of the pit. But while they were talking about what they were going to do, now that they had stolen his coat of many colors and thrown him in a pit, a caravan came by, and they decided, well, you know, we can sell him as a slave and we'll get the money. And then we don't have to worry about this messy business of maybe killing him. So that's what they did. And they took his coat of many colors and they put some animal's blood on it and took it to Jacob and said, oh, Father, unfortunately, he was on his way to bring us our lunch, and he was set upon by a wild animal that killed him. So now Jacob thinks that Joseph is dead. But actually, Joseph was wound up in Egypt, sold there as a slave, and he was purchased by the head of the king's guard, which is a very high political position and a very wealthy man. But because he had been taught by his father to read and write and do math and knew something about administration of a large estate, he became like the chief servant of the head of the guard, whose name was Potiphar. And being a strapping young Hebrew man, and of course the Hebrew people were all better looking than any other nation, Potiphar's wife began to try to seduce him, and she made repeated attempts, which he never gave in to her in any way. But one day, they found themselves alone in the house, and she became very aggressive, and she tried to get him to take off his outer garment, and of course he refused, and he actually had to run from her. But she kept hold of his outer garment. And then she took that outer garment to her husband Potiphar, and she said, your servant Joseph tried to force himself on me. So what did Potiphar do? Threw him in prison. So here we see, just like the songs we were singing, poor Joseph, he was up at the top, he was the favorite of his father, then he was sold into slavery. Then he rose to the top of that household, and now he's in prison. And something within him, you know, changed as a result of these catastrophic events. And he began to try to be helpful to the other prisoners. And two of the prisoners were servants of Pharaoh who had fallen out of favor for some, you know, they made some minor little error, and Pharaoh threw him into prison. And one of them was the Pharaoh's former cupbearer, and the other one was the Pharaoh's former head baker. And they had had troubling dreams. So Joseph came to them and he said, why are you guys so down in the mouth? And they told him his dreams, and he interpreted the dreams for him. That was a gift that Joseph had, was interpreting dreams. So the baker, he said, your dreams mean that you're going to die soon. And he said to the former cupbearer, your dreams mean that you are going to be reinstated as cupbearer to Pharaoh. The cupbearer was actually like the chief butler. And because he was around the Pharaoh so much, it was politically a very advantageous position. So it wasn't just, handing a cup. It was being in charge of the kitchen, tasting the food sometimes, and just making sure that all the Pharaoh's personal needs were met. So that dream also came true. So the cupbearer, this picture, I had already chosen this picture before I saw it. It looks like the cupbearer is actually squeezing the grapes into the king's cup. I don't think that's accurate. But the Pharaoh then had these very strong dreams that he believed were prophetic. One dream was that 7 healthy cows came forward, and then 7 emaciated cows came forward. And then in another dream, 7 healthy sheaves of wheat, and then followed by 7 withered sheaves of wheat. And he didn't know what this meant. So his cupbearer said, well, when I was in prison, there was a guy there that was really good at interpreting dreams. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and before he went into the Pharaoh's presence, he had to shave because the Egyptians were clean shaven, and because they were in a hot climate. And he had to dress, had to change out of his clothing into Egyptian clothing. And he explained to the Pharaoh that these 2 dreams really meant the same thing. There were going to be 7 years of plenty, and then that would be followed by 7 years of famine. And that Pharaoh needed to collect a lot of stores of food during the 7 good years so that he could keep his people alive during the 7 years of famine. And the Pharaoh said, that sounds like a lot of work. I'm going to appoint you to take care of that. You take care of storing up food, and then you take care of releasing it. And when Joseph was brought to him, and Pharaoh said, are you going to interpret this dream for me? Joseph very famously said, no, it's not I. God will give you a favorable explanation. So here we have now Joseph is back up at the top. He's like the prime minister of all of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. And the Pharaoh did everything that he could to make Joseph into an Egyptian. He gave him an Egyptian name, which I cannot pronounce, but trust me, he gave him an Egyptian name, and he gave him a lady of high political standing, the daughter of a high priest, and her name was Asenath, and Asenath became his wife, and they had 2 children, 2 sons. So everything is hunky-dory. He's wealthy, he's got status, he's got power, he's got a family, he's got a wife, he's got children. What could go wrong? Well, they had the 7 years of plenty, and while he was in the midst of dealing with the 7 years of famine, the famine wasn't just in Egypt. It was all throughout the Palestinian, the Canaanite era. And after about 2 or 3 years, guess who showed up? His brothers, sent by Jacob to buy grain in Egypt, which he was, why didn't he ever send word to his family that he was doing well in Egypt. He needed to do that. He needed to deal with that, but he didn't. And so, lo and behold, the 10 brothers show up. He and his little brother would have made 12. But they left the youngest, Benjamin, at home because Jacob would not part with him, because this is the last child of Rachel. Rachel had died in childbirth, giving birth to Benjamin. So this was his baby, and he was not going to send this baby to Egypt with the other brothers. So the 10 brothers arrive, and he's conflicted about this, and he doesn't welcome them, and he kind of makes them sweat a little. He accuses them of being spies. And they say, "Oh, no, we just came to buy grain," and he questioned them closely. And that's when he learned that his little brother was still alive and that his father was still alive. So he said, "Well, I don't really trust you guys. I'll sell you some grain, but I'm not going to sell you any more in the future unless you bring me Benjamin so that I can see for sure that you've told me the truth." So they go home. The story has a lot of little twists and turns in it, but I'm not going to go into every twist and turn. It wound up that he sent them home twice until finally they showed up with Benjamin. And when they did, he totally lost it. He couldn't pretend any longer that he was not, related to them. And when he saw Benjamin, he just totally put down all of the facade. He said, "Guess what? I'm your brother that you sold into slavery." So then they send for Jacob. They send for the whole tribe now. And Jacob comes and he blesses Joseph's 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And he gives all of his tribe, all of Jacob's tribe, the area called Goshen, which was suitable, excellent pasture land for raising sheep and cattle, which is what the Jacob's economy was based on. It looks to me like it's the kind of the same area where the My Pillow guy gets his cotton. Yeah. Okay. But so now we have all of the Israelites in Egypt, and that's how they got there. After Moses led them out of Egypt 400 years later is when they divided up the whole territory between the 12 tribes. And I don't know if you can read it. The big yellow one in the middle, that's Manasseh. That's one of Joseph's sons. And under that, kind of the very pale color, is Ephraim. That was his other son, Joseph's other son. And then below that, a very small white area, is the tribe of Benjamin, which it looks like it's kind of, why would Benjamin have such a small area? Well, it was a very important area because in the tribe of Benjamin, that area had Jericho and Jerusalem. So it was a choice spot. So that's the story, or the parts of the story of Joseph. And metaphysically, he represents imagination. He saw himself as a young boy. He saw himself as the ruler of his clan. That's how he pictured it. And eventually, that did manifest, but not when he was young. in that case, his imagination led to misery. Remember when we were studying the 12 powers? All of the 12 powers, we have them on the human level and the spiritual level. And by using his imagination on the human level, he managed to alienate all of his half-brothers. And then when he got to Egypt, even though he rose to the top, his unfortunate interaction with Potiphar's wife put him right back to the bottom. But in prison, he learned to use his gift on the spiritual level. He matured somehow through this. And he used his gift of being able to interpret dreams to the benefit of others. And that is why when he went before Pharaoh, he said, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." Well, what's a favorable answer? A favorable answer is something that is good in every direction. It's good for me, it's good for you, it's good for everyone. An answer that was good for the Pharaoh, good for the Egyptian people, and good for Joseph. So what we see is Joseph trying to be Egyptian in every way on the outside, and then on the inside, keeping his religion to himself. It kind of leaked out a little bit because he gave his sons Hebrew names. But for the most part, his exterior facade was that he went totally native, He was totally Egyptian. And he made no effort to contact his family. And interestingly, after he got out of prison, he did no more dream interpretation. And he kind of closed the door on his past. He had wealth, family, and prestige until his brothers appeared. In our study of the quantum living course, we talk about a trigger. A trigger is something that happens in your life that brings up a strong emotional negative feeling. And the trigger was when his 10 brothers arrived. The trigger is based on a shadow, something in your subconscious that needs to be healed. So that's why he was torn. He wanted to punish his brothers, but he couldn't figure out how to punish his brothers without also punishing his father and his little brother that he loved. So he was torn. And at one point, when he was sending the brothers away and they'd come back, and he sent them away again and they'd come back, and he was dealing with them in this high and mighty position. At one point, he just broke down and he had to leave so that they couldn't see him crying. So what he needed to do, if you think about it, he had to acknowledge his own guilt in causing his brothers to turn against him. He knew that he had a favored place with his father because of who his mother was. Not that he had earned it, not that he was really more capable or better than his brothers, but that it was just chance. But yet he took advantage of that. He told his brothers when he was young, he told his brothers, "Someday I've had dreams, you all are going to bow down to me." He was selfish, just like, all teenagers tend to be very self-centered. So he needed to forgive himself so that he could forgive his brothers. Unconditional selflessness. To get unconditional love, which is what we all crave. Little babies are supposed to get unconditional love. right? They don't do anything. You just have to love them. Whatever, just eat, sleep, and the other thing they do. That's all. They don't earn love. And that unconditional love, every human being needs. And if you're not getting unconditional love, then your needs are not being met. So what we need to do when we realize that something needs to be healed, we need to give that to ourselves. And so Joseph gave this unconditional love to himself by forgiving his brothers. And they even said to him, after it became, after it was known, the relationship, and that Joseph was going to take care of them and take care of the whole clan, they even said to him, we just can't believe that you're forgiving us, because what we did was pretty bad. And he said the famous line, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." Whenever we are having a hard time, there is a blessing in that. And we claim that by giving ourselves unconditional love. So, like Joseph, who held on to his faith, adversity eventually led to healing and a blessing for everyone. God means only good for us. There is a blessing in every adversity. So, we use our imagination to envision a blessing, a win-win situation for everyone involved, no matter what our challenges are. Very often when people come to me and they tell me about some challenge that they're having, I will ask them, how do you want it to be? And they're usually stumped. They're usually like, well, I have this problem, solve this problem. How do you want it to be? And they have to be kind of nudged into specifically seeing what they want. If you imagine it, then you can manifest it. If you don't imagine it, then, there's that saying, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. You have to be specific about the blessing that you want. If you are praying for healing, you see yourself or the person you're praying for healed and whole and, doing jumping jacks, playing golf, swimming, or whatever. Able to do what a healthy person does. And if there's a conflict in your life with anyone, if there's anyone you haven't forgiven, then you need to see that conflict resolved. Imagine everybody being happy, being together, enjoying life together. Imagine how you want it to be. And if you're praying for prosperity, have some kind of financial challenge, see yourself living your life with all of your needs met and no stress whatsoever. See it clearly. And above all, you need to have compassion on yourself. Because we all want unconditional love. And we're taught that God gives you unconditional love. But if you're going to believe that, then you have to believe also that God gives unconditional love to everybody else, regardless of what you think they have done. You may be judging them, but God is not judging them. God only loves. God wants us to heal from all of our grievances, all of our scars, whatever the form. So you use your imagination as a spiritual tool. Imagine yourself at peace, without enemies or grievances, being loving and beloved. This is why Jesus said, love your enemies. I can imagine the people hearing this for the first time. The teacher saying, love your enemies? Well, God loves them, just like he loves you. So after you visualize it, you affirm it, you claim it, and then give thanks for it, ending all of your prayer with thanksgiving. Some of the lessons from the story of Joseph. I love these Old Testament stories, and if you were in the class, I just spouted off for 2 hours with these stories. They're just so full of just humanity, and it's so relevant to us today. So, our closing affirmation is, God is blessing me now. Together. God is blessing me now. Tell your neighbor, God is blessing you now. God is blessing you now. And as a group, let us affirm, God is blessing us now. God is blessing us now. So, amen, so be it, and so it is.